Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today we're going to be taking a look at the TP-Link Omada OC200 hardware controller. Now, if you're unsure what this is, it's basically just a tiny piece of equipment that runs the Omada controller software. So when you set up a TP-Link Omada network, usually you install the controller to a server somewhere, or maybe you just manage your access points in standalone mode. But this is just to have a dedicated piece of hardware to run your controller, so you don't have to worry about having that whole server or whole desktop on 24/7 just to run your controller software. And for the purposes of this video, we're just going to set up the hardware controller and add a few access points to it. If you've used the controller software before, it is the exact same. Really, the only nuances here is just the physical connections and getting connected to your hardware controller for the first time to set it up. So let's go ahead and jump right into this. And all we're going to do, we're just going to take our Omada controller and plug it into our power over Ethernet switch. Now, there's two options for power on this controller. You can either power it through the first Ethernet port, which is what we're going to do. If you connect that to a switch that has power over Ethernet capabilities, then you don't have to worry about any sort of external power. But if you don't have that, there is this plug-in on the back, which is a micro USB connection, and you can use a micro USB cable with a wall wart to power this device. Now let's go ahead and just kind of look at the topology here. We have our power over Ethernet switch, which we are plugging our OC200 into. Now, for the purposes of this video, let's just say our switch is a dumb switch. It doesn't have any sort of advanced VLAN configuration or any of that on it. So the Omada controller is going to be on our same network. And for the purposes of this video, this switch is just one single VLAN. It's a flat network. We're going to assume we already have stuff like desktops and whatnot hooked up to it. And we're also going to assume that you already have a router of some sort, which will be handing out addresses via DHCP. And then what we're going to add later is just 3 new access points off of the switch, and we're going to manage them with our Omada controller. So how do we do this? Well, first there's a couple of nuances depending on your network. In mine, I already have a wireless access point set up, so we're already getting wireless in my house, and that's the first way I'm going to find this hardware controller. The second way is really just to check your DHCP server, log into your router or whatever is handing out addresses on your network, and find the Omada controller. It should have grabbed an address via DHCP if it is enabled, and then all you have to do is browse to that IP address. So write that down, make sure you remember it. And if you don't have DHCP for some reason, I do believe that these default back to 192.168.1.20. Don't quote me on that yet. We can take a look at it once we actually get into the device. But it does have an IP that it falls back to if DHCP is unavailable. Now, the way I'm going to set this up is with the Omada mobile app. If you don't have it, just go to the App Store and look for TP-Link Omada. And we can see I already have 2 controllers listed in this app. December Omada is the controller that's running on a server right now. So that is how I already have wireless, because I already have a software controller. And then we can see Toasty Omada here, which is actually no longer in use. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that out. And then we're just going to go to add a new controller. And right here it shows up, Omada controller and the designator. So as long as your phone is on the same network as your hardware controller, then it should just automatically show up here in the app. So we're going to go ahead and tap that and go through the controller setup. So let's get started. What do we want to name it? We'll just call this something like home-omada, and we'll leave country, United States, and the time zone. Set this to where you're actually located. So instead of UTC, we are going to go to Central Time, US and Canada, because that is where I am located. And we will accept and confirm. Actually, let's not confirm to join the user experience improvement. I don't feel like doing that. We'll just accept the terms of use. Now it asks you for your application scenario. I still am a little bit confused over exactly what these do. In my original unboxing, I kind of speculated that maybe this has to do with like the density and the wireless settings and stuff like that. But ever since I've been actually using this equipment, I haven't really noticed any sort of difference between which you choose. So we're going to go ahead and just put this on home, hit next, and then from here we can configure devices if we had any already connected. We're going to wait just a minute to actually connect our access points, so we're going to skip that for now, and it's asking us to pre-configure our Wi-Fi network. So let's go ahead and take a look, see what we want to name it. Let's just say Toasty-Wi-Fi, and we'll just put it as PASSWORD1234 for the password. So password 1234 will be our login information for Toasty Wi-Fi once we get the access points added. So let's go ahead, click next, and here we can actually set up our controller login. So what do we want our main administrator name to be? I'll just keep it as admin. Email is optional, so I'm not going to fill that out. And we'll go ahead and give this the same password as our Wi-Fi. I do not recommend you actually do this. Please make sure you put a strong password on your actual controller. And also, it would be great if it is a different password than your wireless password. Now below we have device account. Now this is used by the controller to log into any access points or whatever you want to add to it. Now, if you are setting up devices from scratch, this really doesn't matter too much because it'll just use the default, which is admin and admin. If we set both of these to admin, it will try to adopt any new access points we try to add to the controller with these credentials. Now, if you already have Omada access points or Omada devices set up and you set custom logins, so say this network is already being managed by a controller, much like how mine is, you probably have non-default device credentials. So here you would put those in if you are wanting to adopt them to this new controller. Right now, I am not going to do that. Eventually, we're actually going to migrate my software controller to this, but that will be in another video. So for now, we're just going to hit next, and we can link this to our TP-Link cloud login. I'm actually not going to do this. We can just skip it. So we're going to turn off cloud access and hit skip. If you want to be able to manage this from the online TP-Link Omada portal, go ahead and leave it on and put in your TP-Link account information. But here we're taken to the summary screen, so we can see we've named our controller Home Omada. We have the time zone set correctly. The application scenario is home, which again doesn't really matter. It's going to pre-configure a wireless network named Toasty Wi-Fi with a password of password1234. We're going to have a login admin account. This is what we're going to log in to this controller with. And that is admin and also password 1234. And then we just kept admin as our device account info, and we turned off cloud access. So let's go ahead and click done, and that's going to push these configurations to our new controller. Now I will mention if you don't have a wireless network already set up or the phone app or any of that, if you just browse to the IP that you found for this device in DHCP, it'll take you through these exact same steps just in a web browser. It just looks a little bit different, but all of the information is going to be the same, and you can still skip the cloud access and all of that kind of stuff. But now it shows that our controller is on. So let's go ahead and switch over to a PC to take a look at the actual controller. And just real quick, because I forgot what the IP of this one was, on our app, if we just back out of that controller settings, you can see we have right here Home Omada at 10.88.13.106. So that is what we are going to browse to. So let's go ahead and open up a web browser. And we're going to go to https 10.88.13.106. And this is going to bring us to the login page for our controller. So we set our login information to admin and password 1234 with a capital P. We'll go ahead and log in. And now at this point, we have our Omada controller pretty much set up and ready to go. So we're ready to start adding devices, and we can see we have new controller software available. We really should update this right now. But I'm going to go ahead and just add our access points in first, and then we will take care of that update. So let's go ahead and grab whatever access points or switches or whatever you have. Go ahead and connect them to the same network. So we're just going to plug our access points into this switch right here. So I just plugged my 3 access points into this PoE switch. This will power all my access points because they support that. And these are actually the TP-Link in-wall access points, not the circular ones. But the behavior and all of that is exactly the same. So now that they're connected, we should be able to see them ready for adoption in our controller. So on the left side, if we go to devices, then this is where we should see them start to pop in. However, I am not seeing them for some reason. So what would seem to be the problem? Well, let's go ahead and start troubleshooting. So what do we need for these to show up? Well, there's one. Maybe you just need a little time. But if you don't see them, you need to make sure that your access points, one, are on the same network as your controller, which also means that they need to be able to get an address via DHCP. Again, if they don't get that address, they do fall back to a default, which let's go ahead and see if we can't find that. I do believe it's 192.168.1.20, but let's just verify. I'm going to go ahead and agree to these cookies. And we're going to go down to the settings menu. And we did just see all three of them pop in there. So just give it a minute. It says the uptime was 2 minutes. So that's how long it took for it to come online and contact the controller, I guess. But let's go into the settings menu at the bottom left of the navigation bar and go down to controller settings, I believe. And down here at the bottom is the access configuration. So right now we have 10.88.13.106 as our IP address. That's what it got via DHCP. And I actually don't see the fallback IP information. And it's just because I'm apparently blind. If we scroll back up, it's the very first option here. So we've got the controller name, the time zone, NTP, and all that. But here at the bottom, you can see our network settings are set to DHCP, and our fallback IP is actually 192.168.0.253. So if this controller was unable to grab an IP address from the existing DHCP server, it would automatically configure itself with this 0.253 address. And as long as whatever you're using to configure this has a network adapter connected to it within this network, then you would be able to configure it for the first time. So let's go back to our devices page and start adopting these access points. So right here on the right side, we have this little check mark that says adopt. So let's just go ahead and click all three of them. They should all be moving from the pending state to the adopting. And if we give this a few minutes, then they should show up. We'll see if they automatically update or not. Well, right now they move to the provisioning state, which provisioning just means that the settings are being pushed to these access points. So any access point that you adopt to this Omada controller is going to get the global settings for this site. And what I mean by that is in the bottom left, if we look at settings, we configured these wireless networks, well, this one wireless network during our basic setup. So this wireless network is automatically going to get pushed to any of these access points that we adopt. And we can limit this or change this later, but that is the default behavior. If you have wireless networks configured in your controller, then the devices you adopt are going to get those. Now, it's a little bit different for switches because obviously switches aren't going to broadcast wireless networks, but switches would get the information that would come from like the LAN wired network configuration or the profiles for switch port profiles. So you can actually pre-configure basically your entire network with no hardware at all. You can go through and configure the wired portion. This would apply to the Omada gateway devices, the routers. You could configure the port profiles, which would apply to switches, and the wireless networks, which will apply to access points. And then basically you could drop this controller at a site or another house or whatever, order your equipment completely separate, plug it all in, and as you adopt them, they will get these settings. Now let's go back to the devices tab, and we can see all three of ours show connected at this point. So they are ready to go. And let's just bring our phone back up here for a second and go to our Wi-Fi area and see if it shows up. Yep, it does. It shows up as Toasty Wi-Fi. If we tap on that, then we can use our pre-configured password, which was just password 1234, and connect to it. And now we're connected to our new wireless network on our new access points. And that is all we need to do to get this running with the hardware controller and our access points. But there's a few other maintenance actions we're going to do while we're here. And that one is going to be to upgrade the controller. So we want our hardware to be on the latest version of software most of the time. So let's go ahead and update this. And to do this, we're going to go to the settings again. So bottom left, click on settings. And this time we're going to go to the maintenance section. And if we scroll down to the bottom, we can see there's a few options for our hardware controller. We can reboot it, we can factory reset it, or we can check for an upgrade. So let's go ahead, check for upgrade, and we can see that there is a new version available. Let's look at the details here. I guess that's just a change. Those are just change notes from the last one. I'm not too worried about what those actually say. But let's go ahead and click upgrade. And it says that our internet connection is going to be lost for several minutes during the upgrade. Yep, we're good with that. We're not using these access points for our internet connection, and we don't have an Omada router, so we're not actually going to lose internet connectivity. We're just going to lose connectivity for anything connected to these new access points, which is right now just my phone. All right, and it took it about a minute and a half, but now it is rebooting. Okay, and here we are roughly 5 minutes later, and that screen has gone away, and we've got the Omada startup screen. So do give that part a little bit of time. Took a little longer than I thought it would, but eventually it did do something. And at this point, it's saying that this is going to take 3 to 4 minutes again. So this entire process, if you are counting, is probably going to take about 10 to 15 minutes. And we are now back at the login screen. So that did take about another 3 minutes. So I'd say in total, that was probably about 7 to 8 minutes of waiting around for the update. So let's go ahead and log back in with our admin and password 1234 and just see how different this interface is, which at first glance here looks really not much different at all. So now we have our controller ready to go. It is updated. It's got its APs. Let's go ahead and go into our site, which is called default. That's just what it calls the first site that is created. If we click on that, we'll go into our site settings, and let's go ahead and check the firmware version of our actual APs. So usually when you're setting this up, you're going to upgrade the firmware for your controller as well as everything else in the network, and you can enable auto updates for that, but most of the time I just leave it manual. Anyways, let's go to devices. And since we updated the firmware for this controller, our APs are going to reprovision and probably say that they're adopting again. That's just kind of what they go through whenever there's a major change, like a firmware update for the controller. And here we go. They're all three. Oh, well, they're in the configuring stage. Anyways, one difference that I have noticed right away from upgrading this controller is if we go into the settings menu here under our site, we no longer have the actual controller specific settings. What we need to do to change settings which affect the controller itself is go up to our organization thing and go to global. So I believe that they have made this more along the lines of like a unified dream machine where you've got the device specific settings versus your actual like site configuration settings. To do anything that affects the controller itself, which would be the controller's IP, the firmware updates and all that, we need to go into the global view now and then go to settings. And this is where we can see all of our controller specific settings, which there's also looks like there's been a few added, might have been rearranged, something like that as well. So like now system settings is where we saw our access config previously under controller. And then we've got controller settings here for the name and fallback IP and all of that. Anyways, when you upgrade firmware, I'm sure TP-Link is much like Ubiquiti, where they like to change the location of things and update how it looks. Hopefully they don't go too crazy with that. But if we go back to maintenance, our firmware update section is actually no longer here. It's just the backup section. So if we go to system settings, this is now where our check for upgrade actually is. So upgrading our access points to the latest version, it would appear they're already at the latest version. They might have updated as soon as we adopted them, or they just came to me with the latest firmware edition anyway. Because usually what you would see if they were not up to date is a little arrow over here next to the reboot button. And it would be like an up arrow that you could check to upgrade the firmware to the latest. But I did just check the Omada website. These access points are running version 117, and it looks like, actually, if I drag this over here, it looks like the latest firmware that I can even download from the Omada site is 116. So do with that what you will. I'm not sure why the absolute latest isn't available here, unless I'm doing something wrong. But the moral of that story is our access points are already up to date, so we don't need to do anything. Now, At this point, we could just coast. Everything is good to go. We set up our 3 access points. Maybe what you want to do is name these based on where they're at. If you click on your device, go to config, then you can rename it from the MAC address of the device to like kitchen AP. Go ahead and apply that, and go ahead and just rename all of them. So kitchen, living room, basement, for example. This just at least gives you a name to associate with the access point so you know kind of where it is when you're looking at it in the controller. And there's a whole lot of other options and configurations that we could do from this controller, but this video is not focused around showing you everything we can do with this. I will be going through some of the additional setup in other videos, which will be coming. But for now, this is how we get the controller off the ground. What we did, we just plugged it in. We're powering it via PoE. It's connected to our switch, which all of our other devices are connected to. And the way that we configured it for the first time was actually through Wi-Fi that already existed. Again, if you don't already have that, then you can just browse to the IP of the hardware controller, whatever IP it got with DHCP. Anyways, before I ramble on too much, I'm just going to leave it there. And as always, happy networking.